Today I'm going to show you what went wrong on this planet and how it all began. Hi, I'm Saratoga Ocean. Welcome to my channel where I give you the knowledge you need to spiritually awaken and ascend with confidence and clarity. So I think it would be a good idea to go all the way back to the beginning and talk about what really happened regarding this planet and how we got into such a desperate state on this earth. I'm going to share with you what I think is the best metaphor that was ever written to describe how everything happened on this planet, how we went from an absolute incredible paradise to what we see today, where we have war, violence, suffering, pain, and all of the issues that this planet has had as far back as we even know. So I think that the greatest metaphor that was ever created to describe what happened in its simplest form is the story of the Garden of Eden. Now, I don't see this story as a religious story because I'm not religious at all. I've actually thought of the Garden of Eden as being the most tragic story that was ever written. And it's written in what I would call a symbolic language. I don't think it is something that should be taken literally. Now, before I start, I want to share with you the fact that my reference points that I use for everything that I share with you guys are reference points that exist completely outside of this universe. See, the beings that I channel and myself, we communicate from completely outside of this universe and all of its dimensions. We communicate from a place where none of these problems or issues even exist. And that is so we have perspective. So let's get back to the story of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden as a paradise represents how life exists in what I call the real universe. This is life manifesting in perfect love and perfect beauty. It's where life manifests as a perfect expression of omnipresent love and oneness. So in the Garden of Eden, in the story as a metaphor, there was no food chain where creatures eat each other in order to survive. There was no violence and there was no war. There was no death and no suffering. There was only perfect fulfillment and the beauty of natural creation. And most importantly, there was the unlimited potential of man and woman as co-creators of whatever they wanted to create without struggle and without pain. So the Garden of Eden represents the essence of how life manifests in the cosmos and how it was originally designed when it is untouched by fear and by the source of fear. This paradise represents the absolute vision of how everything was originally meant to be. And it's important not to lose sight of that truth because that really needs to be our touchstone or our vision of what it is that we are all trying to evolve into and what our planet is trying to evolve into. Now, I'm sure there are people who would say, you know, that sounds kind of boring, just sitting around in this beautiful garden all day. But what you need to understand is that the Garden of Eden represents simply the essence or the starting point of creation. It's actually a representation of true creation principles. So the symbolism of Adam and Eve actually represents the yin and yang of creation. The principles of man and woman or male and female, it's essentially about nature as the basis for all creation. So the Garden of Eden represents a creation inception point, holding the key principles of how planets, stars, universes, and all of life gets created. And there are an infinite number of these inception points throughout the universe. Now, you know, I have talked a lot about an experiment that was tried in this universe that led to some deadly consequences. And it's why we have all the problems and troubles that we and many other worlds suffer from in our universe. So this was actually an experiment in creation physics. Now, I won't be able to go into great detail about that experiment here, but let's say that it was a direct cause of how the humans in this story fell from the garden. So in this metaphorical story, a serpent enters the garden. The serpent represents what we could call the original source of fear. And as Telstar, we like to refer to that as the absence, meaning the absence of an experience of omnipresent love. Because that's actually what fear is. The essence of fear is the absence of that experience that is supposed to be a continuous, unbroken connection to who we really are and to the source that manifests all things. So the serpent actually represents the first original lie, which is the lie that there could ever be such a thing as not omnipresent love. So in the story, the serpent approaches Eve, the woman, first. What this really means is that Eve represents the yin of creation principles. It represents the receptive factor. So naturally, the invading serpent is first going to enter the point of greatest receptivity, which is the powerful yin factor. You can actually look at your own breath as a great example of how this works. For example, when you inhale, you take in the air, you can think of that as yin. And when you exhale, you can think of that as yang. See, both are exactly equal, but the breath has to enter at the yin point. It cannot enter your body on the exhale. So the fact that in the story, the serpent approaches Eve first represents the fact that it must enter at a yin point of this creation inception point. It cannot gain entry through the yang point any more than your breath can enter on the exhale. Now, once Eve accepts and receives the serpent's deadly suggestion, which I'll get to in just a moment, the serpent immediately gains entry into both Adam and Eve's consciousness because the yin and the yang are inextricably tied together as one, just like the inhale and the exhale are tied together as one breath. So the serpent points to a tree in the middle of the garden. It is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This is so key. See, the tree itself represents the fact that this larger experiment was tried in this universe and thus actually contaminated this creation inception point. So now the fact that this tree is in this garden represents a new creation potentiality that really shouldn't even be there at all. So in the story, the serpent says to Eve, "Hey Eve, if you eat from this tree, if you eat an apple off of this tree, then you will be more powerful than God." What was really happening is that the serpent was hijacking this creation inception point. The serpent was essentially inviting Eve and, of course, Adam to invest their consciousness and energy in this experiment in real time. Now, this absence that I told you about manifests as a parasitic energy. It has absolutely no power to create on its own. It kind of functions in a similar way to a virus. So once the serpent had gained entry into this creation inception point, everything immediately changed. This inception point that was originally meant to manifest as an infinite creation now turned into manifesting as a finite creation. Now, I think in the original interpretation of this story, it was said that God punished Adam and Eve for disobeying and eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And it was said that God decided to punish them with pain and suffering. That's not really the way it works, guys. See, here's the real story. Once this creation inception point was invaded by this parasitic energy of good and evil, then the way that creation manifested immediately changed. Instead of living as infinite beings who had the power to create and manifest forever, human beings would now suffer and die. So now we have to leave the Bible's version of this story. The Garden of Eden actually represents the inception point of creation of this planet and of many other planets throughout this universe. So let's now focus on our planet Earth. Our planet was meant to manifest as a perfect, infinite paradise of absolutely gorgeous life. I guess you could say that that's what was essentially in this planet's original DNA. But due to the problem that the story of the Garden of Eden represents, That's not what happened. Instead, this planet functions as a bed of life where everything suffers and dies and nothing can sustain itself. That includes everything. Humans, plants, animals, and even the very planet itself. The entire energy of this planet operates in reverse. Even gravity is a reversal of energy. I know this is going to sound really weird, but we really shouldn't even need gravity. Now you can see a very clear example of this reversal of energy in the existence of the food chain. Instead of everything here being supported forever by infinite life, living things here must die in order for something else to live. Even plants. Plants need dead matter that decomposes into soil in order to be able to live. This is not normal, and it is certainly not natural. And we also have entropy here. Everything deteriorates, all happening in reverse of its original design. So all of life is constantly struggling to survive against the reverse flow current of energy that exists here. This is why we have war and sadness and suffering and death. See, this is why I always say that suffering and death are not spiritually necessary. So let me go back for just a moment to the vision of the Garden of Eden as a paradise. See, the true Garden of Eden, that true paradise, lives inside of our hearts as pure, absolute knowing. It is what we all rightfully long to go back to. We don't want to see fighting and killing and war and animals eating each other and all of that stuff. So ascension and evolution is the process of restoration and correction of this problem that has arisen in this universe so that everything can be restored back to its original state of omnipresent oneness. And would you like to know what the biggest thing standing in our way on this planet that prevents that from happening at a much faster pace? The biggest obstacle that we have is our belief that suffering and pain and death are spiritually necessary and important. That is a huge obstacle, you guys. Because you see, as long as we insist on holding on to that belief, we're actually standing in the way of the progress of this planet's ascension and of our own ascension and the ascension of all life on this planet back into its originally intended state of omnipresent oneness and beauty and an infinite paradise of life and love. Because we have free will, and if we insist on maintaining that belief that duality is necessary, hatred, anger, war, suffering, all of these things are good for us because they teach us whatever. As long as we maintain that, nothing's going to stop us from holding on to that belief and continuing to manifest it. So what that all boils down to is that we are actually not truly identifying the problem. The problem is that none of these things should be able to exist at all. None of this stuff should be able to even manifest. The fact that they can manifest, the fact that something has gone wrong in this universe that makes it possible for these things to manifest, that is actually the problem. See, but we misidentify the problem. We think the problem is, well, we just have to be better behaved. We have to, just learn to behave better as humans. Or we have to learn to overcome suffering. See, suffering and death and pain and all this stuff, these are symptoms. They're not the actual problem. So when we say we need all this stuff because it's good for us spiritually, what we're saying is we want to keep the problem. The problem is necessary, but we want to get rid of the symptoms. You can't get rid of the symptoms without eliminating the problem. And that is the reason why we continue on this planet for thousands and thousands and millions of years, actually, of the same thing happening over and over and over again. So where are we right now in terms of the history of this planet Earth? Obviously, we have been experiencing a great awakening, an actual spiritual awakening. And I'm not talking about the kind of tainted awakening that involves politics and all that stuff. I'm talking about the real, true spiritual awakening that has been happening on this planet. I'm talking about the fact that we are in an ascension process with an accelerated ascension energy. Why is that happening now? See, we know there have been civilizations that have come and have gone, and there have been many different eras in this planet's history. And right now we are on the verge of entering in a completely new era, and that would be the era of an AI takeover. And this is extremely serious. This affects all biological life on this planet, including ourselves. So there is a massive cosmic push right now for human beings to wake up. Now, right now on a planetary level, this Earth's ascension process is kind of stuck. As a planet, it's not really moving forward on its ascension journey. So if you want to understand how we could potentially unlock this situation, I can put it to you in a very simple way. Let's think of it in terms of what we pray for. What is prayer? Prayer is basically us as human beings expressing our desire to the universe, our desire to that source energy, our desire to that creative power that manifests all that is. That's what prayer is. It's an expression of desire. So the thing that's keeping us stuck is we have two things going on. We have the one thing that I mentioned earlier, our stubborn defense. It's incredibly stubborn, you guys. A stubborn defense of suffering and pain and death. All that stuff, saying this stuff's important, we need this, we need the contrast to appreciate the good. We have all these excuses for why we need this, and we're very defensive, we're very stubborn on a collective basis. We want to hold on to these things existing. Okay, so we have that going on, and then on the other side, hand, as I said earlier, we'll pray for relief. We'll say, oh, please help us, give us relief from all of this. So as long as you have those two things happening simultaneously, this planet is stuck. It cannot ascend. It cannot move forward. So we really need to come to terms with something, and we need to come to terms with it very quickly if we want to have any hope of a change happening. Now, let me point something out to you, because I know for thousands of years people have been praying for relief, right? That's what we do as human beings. We ask for relief from the pain. But on a collective basis, if you look at the history of this planet, it's not happening. It's not changing. There's war, starvation, poverty. You guys know what it is, right? I mean, it's always been here. It's not going away. It still hasn't. So how do we deal with the fact that it's not going away? What do we do with that information? Well, we interpret it as, well, we're not being heard, or we interpret it as, well, it must mean that it's necessary. We interpret it in all of these ways, but I want to give you guys another way to look at it. Maybe the reason it's not really changing is because the way we are praying, and if you don't like the word prayer, that's totally fine. You could just say the way we're asking, the way we're intending, however you want to frame it, the way we're desiring, makes a change virtually impossible. It makes an answer impossible. Because you see, we're not asking for the problem to go away. The problem being the fact that it's even possible for these things to exist. Instead, we try to frame it as a behavioral problem. Well, humans are just badly behaved. So could we get some help with our bad behavior? Maybe that's what we need. And this is why a lot of times prayers don't get answered, because we put conditions on those answers. We have requirements on those answers. So in this case, if we have a requirement that says we refuse to release our belief that the existence of pain and suffering is necessary and spiritually important, if we absolutely stubbornly refuse to release that belief, we're not going to get relief, you guys. We're not, because there are physics behind all of this. And you are never going to be able to control human behavior to the extent where everybody's always nice to each other and loving and perfect and wonderful. Because you see, when the behavior of human beings is a result of underlying principles of physics that are faulty, that are not really the way it was intended to be, the only way you can change things is you have to find a way to control people's behavior. And that's what religions have tried to do. That's what laws try to do. That's what all of these artificial means have tried to do to solve the problem of violence and suffering, etc., etc. Until we ask for and pray for and desire something that is actually possible, it actually addresses the real problem itself and not just the symptoms, we're not going to be able to see relief, you guys. We're not. But overall, we make ourselves extremely vulnerable to being controlled. That's why AI is taking full advantage of the situation. And this is why I constantly say, go to your heart, go to your heart, go to your heart, because your heart is telling you the truth. Okay, your heart is the only thing that's going to tell you the full truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So let me complete this just by explaining the ascension window that we have as human beings right now. We have a limited time before this AI is going to completely overtake this planet. And once it overtakes humanity, as it is intending to do, that's going to start a whole new cycle that everything and everyone's going to have to go through. I don't even want to think about what that looks like or how long that could take. The goal of AI is to detach us completely from our hearts. Do you want to know why? Because once we detach from our hearts, we no longer have access to that infinite creator. We lose our connection. Now, that doesn't mean that that connection isn't there. It just means that it becomes nearly impossible for us to consciously connect. And we need to be consciously connected to express what our desire really is. So there's really no time to waste. So what we need to do is step away from all of the drama and the news and the politics and all the chaos and the spiritual interpretations of everything. We just need to step away from it all. Just come back to a center point of simplicity and ask ourselves, what is it that we really, truly desire? Forget all the excuses, forget all the justifications. What do we really, truly, from our heart of hearts, from our deepest self, from our deepest inner being, what do we actually really want? And not be afraid to express that, because it might be that that true want that lies within us is the perfect alignment with a real solution. So it all comes down to this: being in alignment with an actual solution or being out of alignment with that solution. Currently, we're out of alignment with that solution. We've been out of alignment with the solution for many, many thousands of years. So if we just go deep within, if we take the time, if we just give ourselves a chance to be humble enough, to be clear enough, to release any stubbornness and holding on to the way we think things are, or the way we think things need to be and how they need to unfold. If we stop thinking the answer is to be rescued from extraterrestrials or saviors or whatever, if we just put all that aside and realize that what we need to do is we need to come into alignment with an actual solution that can really manifest. And that's when miracles become possible. So I hope that has given you an enormous amount of food for thought. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, please give it a thumbs up and share it out with anyone else who you think would find this interesting. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I am here every Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday with all new videos. And with that, I'm sending you so much love, light, and positive energy, and I so look forward to seeing you in the next video. Namaste.